Travelers of Reddit, what place made you think I have made a huge effing mistake coming here? So, in terms of first impressions, then Guatemala City. Airport taxi was taking me to the hostel when the driver suddenly stopped in the middle of the street and leaned on the horn in one of those annoyingly long honks that seems to say, "Come on, fight me." I sat up in the back seat to get a better look, and just over the edge of the hood, saw a woman lying on the street, on her back and in labor. A guy was standing over her helping her, but I couldn't tell if he actually knew her. He looked at the driver, who waited a few more seconds before furiously yanking the wheel and whipping us around her and through the rest of the city. Eventually, driver comes to a sudden stop at a huge metal wall with concertina wire on the top. Saw a gate at the corner and realized we had reached my hostel. Next story, Qatar. I had a 24-hour or so layoff in the ad hoc Doha airport on my way to Tanzania. If you're in Qatar for over 12 hours or so, you get a free tour of the country. At the beginning of the tour, I wasn't super aware of the class disparity, what is essentially slavery of foreign workers, and altogether trying too hard nature of Doha. It's a very cool-looking city, but it reminds me of something someone would build in Minecraft when they're playing on creative with no stakes. About halfway through the tour, as our Bengali guide was telling us that every Qatari citizen gets a beach house and a regular house for free by the government, built by foreign workers who may or may not die from heat stroke, while he lived in a tenement apartment with a lot of other people. And about the deaths, either way, who cares? The tour guide, by the way, was doing his best to talk about the grandeur of the city and the people. It was just pretty easy to read between the lines. Next story. Daytona Beach. It was pretty disgusting, with garbage all over the place, people smoking crack in the public bathroom, and a really creepy guy in a Speedo that wouldn't stop staring at my kids. We spent 10 minutes there, packed up, and left. So I have to say, all of that is pretty impressive. 10 minutes, crack, Speedo, possible child predator in 10 minutes? That's impressive. Usually it takes some people a couple of hours, and then maybe next morning, but they got there, sat down, stood up and said, "All right, we're going home." Anyway, next story. So I spent 6 months working in Saltillo, Mexico during the peak of the Zetas and Gulf Cartel wars. If the AK-47 toting guards at the airport were not enough culture shock, my experience leaving the airport really opened my eyes to what I had gotten myself into. Picked up at the airport by local coworker, turned out of airport, and came to a stop next to a truck with 10 to 15 guys wearing full body armor, armed with AKs, Uzis, and Spaz 12 shotguns. And I say, "Is that the Mexican army?" And then my driver chuckles and says, "They are way well too equipped to be the Mexican army." Overall, I enjoyed my time there, but there was definitely a period at the beginning where I was unsure if I had made the right choice volunteering for the assignment. Next story. Cordoba, Argentina. I was stranded there for a week due to a bus strike. My friends and I, all young women, were harassed by the local men every time we stepped outside. Packs of wild dogs everywhere, dirty streets, lots of clubs and bars. But as women, you were guaranteed to be groped at all of them. Tried to go on a hike at one point, but an old lady stopped us because people had been disappearing on that trail. We ended up staying in our hostel most of the time and actually had some great times with the Israeli travelers that were stranded with us. Next story. Growing up, we weren't the richest people on the planet, not even in the top 1%, so we never really went anywhere on vacation. So, finally, when I was 30 years old, I felt like I needed that whole camping experience, so I joined the army. It was like summer camp with more guns and people yelling at you. Fast forward 10 years later, I am in Afghanistan. It is 3:30 a.m., and I am asleep when I hear rockets exploding a couple hundred yards away from me. It was then that I realized that summer camp would have been a whole lot better than this. Next story. Cairo during the Arab Spring. Saw some nasty crap and I feel like I was witnessing the apocalypse. Was lucky to get out after waiting 3 days in the airport for my flight to leave. Edit. I was in Alexandria, 3 hours away by the coast when it started. Was having lunch by the water and then heard explosions on the main road. The police had set up barricades to stop the huge crowd from marching through the streets. They were using tear gas to try and disperse everyone, but it was not working. I saw several people being beaten bloody with sticks by the cops. Because this was on the main road, which is by the water, I had to push through the crowd to get to the middle of the city where it was quiet, according to a kind stranger, and got tear gassed, which was awful. Found a cafe in a safe area and waited there for 5 hours until it was prayer time so I could go back to my hotel. I had a very fitful sleep, and the next morning I found a guy who was driving to Cairo, so I paid him a few $100s to take me to the airport. On the way there were tanks lined up along the highway, and it was clear that the military was not messing around. If I thought Alexandria was bad, Cairo was so much worse. It looked like the whole city was on fire, and there were burnt-out armored police cars and buses in the streets. We got stuck in an area the driver thought would be be okay, but clearly wasn't. Saw more people clashing with the police, sporting bloody faces and ripped clothing. A few were limping and helping each other get away. It was insane. I wasn't too terrified because of the adrenaline, but that sure came afterwards. Finally, though, got to the airport and managed to check in. Flight was delayed by 2 hours, then canceled until the next morning. Same thing the next day. The airport ran out of food and bottled water, and the ATMs ran out of money so people couldn't buy snacks. Somehow, they managed to get more food in and people were given vouchers. More planes also kept landing, God knows why, and the place was packed to the brim. I was lucky to have checked in because they shut down check-in shortly after that. Some people had to wait in the entrance area. And because of the lack of bottled water, people were drinking tap water and became sick. The bathrooms were nightmarishly filthy, and some people preferred to crap in the corners of the waiting lounges. Finally, though, the military let the pilots and crew through into the airport, and on the third day, my flight to Morocco departed. I did not smell too fresh when I landed. Next story. There are a few. I once took a wrong turn in Hong Kong and ended up hiking up this long, winding road into the hills that led to a Chinese army base. Walking up to the gates for directions did not get a friendly response. Then, in Marrakesh, you need to stay near the market. A friend of mine was lured off from the top of the souks by someone offering to show them tanneries and ended up nearly being mugged. Just threw some coins at the guy, and we pegged it back to the relative safety of the tourist-controlled areas. But honestly, the biggest letdown was Hollywood, California. It was seedy. The whole place was just this false, sickening, soulless mess. I stayed in a grotty hostel, I slept clutching my possessions, and got up and got to the Greyhound station as early as I could. My only memory of LA was just wanting to be anywhere else. I hated everything about that city. Oh, and there was going to university in Bradford, UK. Bradford, UK is a crap hole. Next story. Juarez, Mexico. Went there with a few buddies from the army. The city is laden with drugs. Ended up in the back of a cab while the driver was making a drug deal. Said driver then took us to a brothel when we asked to go to a bar. I can go on and on about this place. Edit. We went there first in 2006. The last time I was there was 2010, I believe. During the day, it was shady but typical. But at night is when the action happened. We were just home from Baghdad, Iraq when we first went. We just came home from war. We were young, felt invincible, and thought, hey, how bad can it really be? On a return trip, one of my buddies was insistent on finding the donkey show. Of course, we ended up at the same brothel, and no donkey show. We realized that most of the cab drivers really didn't care where we said we wanted to go. They would get kickbacks from the brothels for bringing people there, no matter what we said. Somehow, we were always dropped off at a strip club or a brothel. And then, a couple of more stories before I returned to work. Went to take a piss in the bathroom at a strip joint, walked into two guys doing coke on the sink. I turned down a bump and proceeded to the urinal. Then some old drunk kept trying to ask me something in Spanish. I couldn't understand him, so he turned towards me, came closer, and got louder. I then felt something warm on my leg/foot. And yup, he was pissing on me as he was trying to talk. I ducked out of there and used 2 Tecates to wash the piss off my foot. I figured better to be covered in beer than piss. Next story. Effing Blackpool in the UK. No offense to anybody, but it was a total crap hole. It's probably the only place I've visited, and instead of wanting to make the most of it, I actually contemplated leaving ASAP. We stayed as it was only an overnight thing passing through to somewhere else, but even the overnight was a night too long. And effing the free breakfast we got, man. We got up very early and dashed from the place as quickly as humanly possible. So, is this why the former members of the Blackpool Combat Club never went to Blackpool, UK? Because it's so awful? It's shite? Can I say that? We can't swear on this channel, but that's European swearing, so it's fancy. Anyway, next story. So, I accidentally wandered into a Scientology-backed psychiatry museum in LA. I knew I had to escape as soon as the video at the start of the tour began. Edit. As others have said, it's the one called Psychiatry, an Industry of Death. I was curious and took a picture of the signage outside to show my friends for lols later. Then a guy came out and said the free tour was starting in a minute. I had time to kill, so I was like, sure, why not? Didn't know of the Scientology affiliation until I looked it up afterwards to see who funded this horror show. Next story. When we landed in Beijing, the first thing I saw was the airport public toilet with crap all over the toilet itself. Someone had obviously squatted over it and crapped all the way down the tank. It was disgusting. Beijing, though, has some amazing cultural landmarks, but beyond the city, it was filthy and filled with rude people. The men would blatantly stare down my top. People would shove into you and cut in lines. Next story. We just visited Rome last week, and while I wouldn't say it was necessarily a mistake, I was very surprised at the amount of people trying to swindle tourists. Even if you indicated you weren't interested, they were still scarily persistent, and I was constantly afraid we'd get pickpocketed or mugged. I've been to several big European cities in the past, and Rome was completely on another level of people vulturing tourists. Next story. My aunt loved Egypt and its culture until she visited there. I don't think she did a lot of research beforehand. She told me how people constantly asked her for money. Also, I guess she would see people pooping in the Nile and then a few yards down drinking from it. She said she would never go back and toned down the Egyptian decor in her home. Next story. Walking around Bangkok with an American expat who's lived in Southeast Asia for 20 years, we turn a corner and he starts walking faster saying, "We shouldn't be here." Street looked the same to me as any of the others we walked along. Turned out we were on the Ladyboy Street that specifically caters to the Japanese. Very specific. Next story. Crossing over into Juarez from El Paso, well, I should back up. El Paso was the first mistake. That city is just dirty. Now, we walked over to Juarez to simply say we went to Mexico. The scary part was the graffiti everywhere that said "Kill Whitey." Immediately turned around. It took us 2 minutes to walk into Mexico and an hour to walk back into the States. Next story. Times Square on New Year's Eve. I went one year when my girlfriend, her brother, and his girlfriend were visiting her dad in New Jersey. He took us to a Broadway play and a fancy sushi dinner, and we parted ways with her dad and stepmom so we could head over to Times Square. And it was awful. Terribly crowded and loud, and we couldn't even get close enough to see anything. After a while, we decided to just give up and we went to a Korean barbecue instead. Next story. Saudi Arabia. I've been working here for 18 months. This place is horrible. The racism and treatment of foreign workers is deplorable. How a Saudi is always right. He crashes into you in a car, it's your fault. Their driving, in general, is dangerous and almost terrifying. Their treatment of women in general is wrong. No alcohol is a ridiculous rule. I respect their right to religion, but to outright ban it is ridiculous. Their way of management in business is Victorian and doesn't function in today's society. Censoring the internet so forcibly is ridiculous. The food is terrible everywhere. I dislike it wholeheartedly. Well, everybody, I know Saudi Arabia sucks, but at least we have the Mr. Beast Lollapalooza Convention Theme Park Center or whatever. Yay. Oh, Mr. Beast. He's a Carolinian. He's betrayed me too, double hard. Oh, that's my statesman going to Saudi Arabia. Let me stop. Anyway, next story. Marrakesh. That city itself is pretty, but has a bit of charm, even though it feels cramped at times. But Marrakesh is a tourist city, and the people that live there know it. I have never been so swamped by people trying to scam me or get me to buy stuff I said I did not want. It feels like the only times I was having fun was when I left the city to visit the areas outside. I felt like a piece of bread that fell on a cockroach-infested floor. Next story. I went to Shanghai on business and met up with an expat to have some drinks. 3 hand grenades later, we were off to a local brewery. 3 beers later, we were off to find a new place that had great beers. So says the expat. We ended up going to the sewer basement that is obviously a dance club / Russian coke den. I remember thinking to myself, and he was never seen or heard from again, and I noped out of there and left to find a cab to go back to my hotel. Turns out, our expat friend lied to us and was looking for weed. Next story. Sao Paulo, Brazil is only worth visiting as a layover hub, or if you know people who live there. Admittedly, I never went to Rio, and some issues may be amplified there, but at least there are beaches and vistas to temper the drabness. Sao Paulo is quite the crap hole, and I can't think of another non-third world city I'd consider worse. Anthony Bourdain described it perfectly. It's like LA vomited on New York City. The traffic is apocalyptic, and public transport is surprisingly lackluster for such a large city doing nothing to make up for it. People spend most of their time hustling and in traffic just to lock themselves away in their gated apartment complexes as a reward at the end of the day. Why gated? The crime, of course. Almost everyone has a story of being mugged, and it's effing expensive. I live in Switzerland, and I found prices for most things to be surprisingly high even by my standards. I don't know how the locals can afford it. But the saddest part is that you have such an amazing mix of people there from every background you can imagine. White, black, Japanese, Lebanese, etc. I just wish that they didn't spend most of their lives stuck in traffic in such a depressing place. Next story. Nairobi, Kenya. Ended up on a stoop over with a group of women, I'm female. We all had stuff stolen, all blatantly overcharged, all had SA, and all ended up staying in one room as random men were coming into rooms. Should point out that all of these men had keys for these rooms, so the hotel was involved. Finally, we all confronted the manager in his office, refused to let him out or his friends in to help him. Managed to get our drinks and food refunded. Weird feeling as he was actually scared. Obviously couldn't see us shaking. Following day, we were forced at gunpoint to put all of the remaining currency into charity bins at the airport. Never again. Next story. I went to Japan with my wife for our honeymoon, and it was in the winter months, so the weather was cool and crisp, and the public transportation is amazing, and it's the cleanest country I've ever been to. The people are phenomenal and nice, and the food is great, but when we landed in Los Angeles for a layover, I immediately regretted leaving Japan. Next story. I was on tour in a band once. We went to Texas, and one of our stops was San Antonio. We played at a church that booked us for 2 consecutive nights with a sold-out crowd. After arriving, the head pastor of the church informed us that he would be booking us a hotel, providing us dinner, and paying our fees for playing. It sounded too good to be true. Most of our stops wrestled us for payment that they had guaranteed for us in advance. Upon arriving at the hotel he booked for us, there was a large brown body-size stain on the mattress on the couch. It immediately raised suspicion. The pastor then told us dinner would be a little later and asked us to come to his favorite restaurant at 1 a.m. We were hungry, and since he was being so nice, we figured why not? Upon arriving at the restaurant, it said closed, but he was in there with a bunch of bodyguards keeping watch who let us in as we were served. This was also very unnerving. The second night, he invited us for dinner at his personal residence, again at 1 a.m. When we got to his house, it was in the middle of a desert with no other houses or sources of light nearby, his yard scoured with security guards standing in the front yard, vigilantly watching, somewhat menacingly. We entered his house, which had several handmaids that brought our meals to us in a nice orderly line of plates, and put all of the plates down at once. None of the maids or guards spoke a word or made eye contact. The rest of the bandmates and I had a private discussion about not to split up that night no matter what. Sure enough, the pastor asked me to step outside with him as he wanted to talk with me. His hand was firmly on my shoulder, and 2 security guards followed us into the yard in the middle of the night. He told me to grab the keys for our van and to follow his car down the road. He asked me not to tell any of the other band members. Now afraid, I told him that the van was not mine and belonged to another bandmate, and to take his car and his keys, I would want permission first. So I went back inside and told my bandmate what was going on, and then told the rest of our bandmates what was happening in case we turned up dead in some ditch in the middle of Texas. Mind you, this was all at the height of some beheadings that had taken place in Mexico near the border close to Texas. So the other guitarist and I got into the van and texted the rest of the bandmates, instructing them to tell people from home where we were and what was happening and to stand by for details. As I drove, the other guitarist gave the other bandmates a play-by-play. This all felt wrong and felt like a huge mistake. He eventually led us to a gas station, still in the middle of nowhere, asked us to get out of the car, and still had told us nothing. He opened our gas cap and then began to fill our gas tanks for us and took us over to the trunk of the black SUV that led us. He opened the back of the SUV, revealing medium-sized ice chests. I was expecting to see some heads or organs or bags for containing organs, but to our surprise, it was full of snacks, food, and drinks, and he wanted to send us off with blessings for bringing joy and entertainment to his congregation. It was altogether shady and unnecessarily secretive. Most of the time I was thinking this was a huge mistake, but in the end we were lucky he was a kind person. But never again. Next story. Initially, Kenya. I didn't even voice these concerns there. When we arrived at the airport, after security, we wanted to see if we could order an Uber. Yes, Nairobi has Uber, but there was no Wi-Fi at the airport, as we had suspected. There were military guys around it too, and one came and asked us what the problem was. Seeing we walked around searching for Wi-Fi, told him that we were trying to get a cab to the city, and he said something like, "You don't have an arrangement for the transportation? Big mistake." And then he left. Anyway, we got in a cab, and before leaving, a few people came around the cab and forced us to change the car and go in another one. The new driver told us the initial cab was driving illegally, no license, and they didn't allow them to drive foreigners. Cool. But anyway, we get to the hotel with no issues now. However, the city feels very dangerous. Lots of stores and all banks have armed private militia at the entrance with metal detectors, and you get questioned before even entering. Pharmacies are behind grates with secured glass. Everybody told us to do whatever we want, but to not be left outside after dark. It felt dangerous. The first day was scary. People could tell that we were tourists after my skin color, and some were asking us questions or trying to sell us stuff. It got better as we went on, and in the end, I got in love with the area, and I really want to go again. But that is the rest of my trip. The initial shock was great. Next story. I went to Detroit a few years ago for 2 residency interviews. After driving around Detroit, I said to myself that this place would be a last resort option in terms of getting into residency. The second interview was at a very large hospital in Detroit. They paid for my hotel room at the boutique hotel. It was a nice place, but I felt like it was haunted as hell. The place was decorated like a typical funeral parlor. I decided to walk around and look for something to eat for dinner. I found a Domino's pizza about 1 block away. I have never seen a Domino's pizza with bulletproof windows before. They had to put the pizza into a box, lock their side of the box, which then unlocked the box on my side, and I can slide the window up and grab my pizza. The only other place I have seen this before was at the post office. Then walking on the way back, some guy on the street tried to sell me a bridge card and an umbrella. Then I go in the next morning, give a minimal performance at the interview, and got the hell out of there. Next story, Barcelona. I've been to some crap holes in my lifetime. I grew up in a few, but by and large, most people are friendly. But Barcelona contains the worst people on earth. My wife was mugged and beaten up on a busy street. Not one person stopped to intervene. As for me, I was held at knife point to stop me from helping. Then, the various police forces all claimed it wasn't their jurisdiction and to contact the other police forces. It stank too. Every time it rained, the smell of raw sewage just flooded the streets. The architecture is poorly presented. They do not want tourists, despite a large portion of the city living off of tourism. Just F that place. Next story. Bangkok. But for a hilarious reason, I live in Tokyo and my company sent a team of us to BKK for some business. We had a few days to ourselves and ended up going on a few highly rated tours. I was the only non-Japanese and the only English speaker, so I was constantly bombarded and singled out by hucksters and street vendors. The tuk-tuk drivers were the most aggressive. I'm well-versed and can even give Elsa a run for the title of Ice Queen when need be, but my Japanese coworkers were a judgy bunch, so I had to be polite every time. It ended up being mentally exhausting getting singled out and targeted for 7 days, with my company looking for me to make a faux pas in Thai or Japanese. MBK made up for it though. MBK is love, MBK is life. Next story. Northern India as a woman. Even with my parents and I was 16. But that excluded where we went up near the border near Nepal because that was beautiful and the people were more Nepalese. But the rest, don't get me wrong, the ancient architecture such as forts, peacocks, and food are amazing, but the men following you around in groups and taking videos and pictures of you on their phone, even with my dad there, and barely no women in the streets or towns. Plus, a lot of the people are arrogant and think they're better than you or try to rip you off. Not all there are, there's exceptions, but we saw this anywhere we went. Next story. Pakse in southern Laos. I immediately got bad vibes from the place when I got off the bus. The whole place was completely dilapidated, even by developing nation standards. The streets were full of stray dogs that were really intimidating. The hotel I arrived at was what really sealed it though. Some fat American guy was sitting outside in the reception area, sipping on a beer and smoking. I went out for a smoke after checking in, and I began talking to him. He seemed okay, if a bit eccentric. He invited me into his room to look at some video he wanted to show me depicting a riot at a baseball match in some American city. It was then he revealed his hate for other races and his love for violence. His room too was an utter effing disgusting nightmare in shambles, and he'd apparently lived there for a couple of months. I just felt really dodgy around him, and I watched his every move in case he was going to try and drug me while pouring a drink for me. He even locked the door at one stage. There was a huge knife on his dressing table, and I kept an eye on that for most of the time. Then, after what felt like an age listening to him incessantly ramble on about crap and agreeing with him just to appease him, I made the excuse that I had to leave to make a phone call. I walked through Poxy, this dodgy effing town, at like 11:30 p.m., half expecting to be mugged just so I could avoid this American guy. After spending 20 minutes on the phone at a high-end hotel to my parents back home, I wandered around before returning to my guest house, fully expecting him to be asleep, but I was wrong. He was still awake, glaring at me as I arrived, like as an effing man possessed. He roughly approached me, asking where the F I'd been. He then said we're going for a drink in his room. He began to latch on to me, trying to physically pull me into his room. I refused to budge though, and I made it into my room, locking the door behind me. But this psycho's room was right next to mine, and I could hear him smashing crap up and down when he went back into his own room. I decided then it was a good idea to barricade my hotel room door with the wardrobe in the room in case this MF decided to force himself into my room while I slept. Except, I didn't sleep at all. I sat up all night playing Snake on the old Nokia phone I was now using. This was back in 2013. Good times. Next story. Honestly, New York City. I come from a small town of less than 600 people. I moved into a small metroplex as a teenager. Somehow, along the way, I thought New York City was gonna be the bomb. I had my hopes and dreams piled all at the feet of this pedestal that I put New York City on in my head. Well, about 15 years after first wanting to visit NYC, I finally did this past winter. And I could not have been more disappointed. I kept up just fine. I followed all the rules and nothing bad happened. It just didn't live up to my expectations at all. And that really sucked. Next story. Belfast, Northern Ireland. I went on a business trip a few years ago, and the drive from the airport to the city center goes past some pretty sketchy housing estates. We had our taxi pelted with stones by a gang of youths who were swigging beer on a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. The city center itself is okay, but much like anywhere, really. But you don't have to travel too far from there to be reminded of the city's troubled past. Then, honorable mentions go to Aberdeen, cold and full, Dubai, soulless and dull, and New York, expensive and dull. Next story. I used to attend an all-Irish speaking school in Dublin. In 6th year, 18 years old, we went up to Belfast on a school trip. Our first stop was another Irish-speaking school at the top end of Falls Road. Driving up there on a bus is a mad experience with the memorials and stuff all over, and there was a weird tension to the place, but that wasn't the bad part. After the school visit, we headed to Stornmount. Us being a big group of Irish speakers walking around Stornmount with a Sinn Féin tour guide who was talking to us in Irish earned us a lot of fierce looks as we went about our tour. This gave the whole thing a very nasty atmosphere. To make it worse, this was during the height of the flag protests. Next story. Detroit. There is constant road construction here. I took a detour through a suburb once after working late, only to be met with a crowd of about 15 thuggy-looking dudes ambling straight up the center of the road, a couple on bikes. I slowed to a crawl, hoping they would make a hole. Instead, they decided to surround my car, leaning to look into the windows and drumming on the trunk lid, leering about how scared Whitey looked before I eventually got an opening and took off. Also, the average police response here is like 45 minutes. I got my CPL after that. Next story. A few years ago, I was dating a girl who lived on the West Coast. I'm from the UK, and a buddy and me flew out to visit her and some friends for a week. We decided to take a drive down the coast from Medford to Eugene/Eureka. We were looking for somewhere to stop and pulled into a motel on the outskirts of town. Because we were poor students, me and my then girlfriend got out and had the others hide in the car while we went to check in for a room. We figured that we would rent a room and the others could sneak in later to sleep. Then, a huge woman in a miu-miu came out and told us that people usually just live here, but we have one room. As we walked to the room, a variety of people covered in mud came out to watch us, hawk-like. She opened the room door. Inside, there was yellow peeling lino on the floor, walls and ceiling. In pieces, in places, it was torn. The couch was upside down, and there was a large reddish-brown stain on the floor in the corner, which I am fairly certain was blood. And then our casual walk back to the car, with one ear open for the sound of a gun being cocked, was something to behold. Next story. My wife and I went to Jamaica, and we picked a place that was 2 hours from the closest resort. It came recommended from a friend. When we got off the plane, the airport was full of white people. When we got in the cab, after about 30 minutes of driving, we were the only white people in sight. Now I know this is something that a lot of people that aren't white deal with every day, but this was my first time being the only white person on an island 2 hours away from anything that looked familiar, and with no working phones. I got out of the car and they said, "This is our slow season, so you're the only guests we have." And I was like, oh, F, man. That being said, it turned out to be the best vacation of my life, and they were truly lovely people. I got a ton of weed, and me and this worker spent the afternoon rolling joints and sharing cool stories. He later brought my wife and I fresh coconut, and we smoked some more while he explained random Jamaican stuff to us. It ended up being a great vacation, and I got to spend the week with truly lovely people. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Okay, OP, you had us in the first half, not gonna lie. The white guy was like, "Where will my people be? What will I do? Oh, I guess I'll smoke weed with Lil Jacob from GTA 4. Hell yeah." Anyway, next story. So, I was at a restaurant in Athens, and me being naive ignored the Google reviews warning tourists to stay away. but I was hungry and it was close to the hotel. I ordered the chef special and started to regret it when I heard the familiar beeping of microwaves from the kitchen. Honestly, I was hungry enough not to care, but what I was served will forever remain burned into my brain. It was an abomination of food resembling a face with paprika for cheeks, tomato slices for eyes, and a lemon slice for a nose, all above a small piece of meat buried underneath molten cheese. It tasted about as good as you would imagine. Next story. Went to Little Rock for spring break. I'm not from the US. Went for a drive with some buddies and ended up in the ghetto basically. Shacks that were falling apart with $50,000 cars out front kind of neighborhood. I'm not from the US, so it was like, what the hell is wrong with people living in a 200 square foot rundown piece of crap but has a rebuilt muscle car and a BMW in the driveway? But okay. The 20-year-old van started sputtering at a red light in front of a convenience store that was being robbed too. I'm not Christian or anything, but I prayed that night. Next story. Saudi Arabia. My parents made me go there for Umrah, they're Muslims, and the first night I was walking around the Kaaba, I almost got trampled. I also saw a dead guy there. My youngest sister, she twerked inside the holy mosques. My mom almost got arrested at Medina for entering a graveyard. Now I have another place that I'll hate to travel to, but have to eventually because of parents. Bangladesh. Edit. To clarify, my youngest sister doesn't know how to fully twerk. From what my other two sisters told me, she just moved her butt up and down. However, it pretty much looked like she was twerking. I just want to point out really quick how OP had a negative experience. Mom almost got arrested. The sister was twerking, but OP didn't mention the dad, so maybe it sounds like he had a great time there. Good for that guy, at least. He went to Mr. Beastland. Anyway, next story. So, some crap hole small town in northern India, which I have no interest in remembering the name of. We got off the train in order to change trains, but decided to spend the night because it was late. Walking into the town square, we, 2 guys and 1 woman, get surrounded by a large mob of angry men. I have no idea what they were angry about. They were yelling at us, pushing and shoving. Just as outright panic was about to set in, like a vision out of the crowd, comes a well-dressed guy speaking in English. "I am so sorry, come with me, and you will be safe." He took us to a crap dive of a hotel. Jump forward 30 minutes, I'm in the hotel room having a shower when the front desk clerk walks into the shower. Not just into the bathroom, but into the shower stall with me. I scream and tell him to get the F out. The 2 guys I was traveling with come running into the room and the little Indian perv bolts out of there. In the middle of the night then, I wake up to find some other Indian pervert self-pleasuring at the end of my bed. 10 out of 10, would not recommend in Lonely Planet. Next story. Istanbul. I'm a female and I went there with female friends. I never felt so uncomfortable in my life just walking down a street, and I won't even mention using public transportation. I didn't wear anything revealing or inviting in any way. Not that I think that any kind of clothes should be considered an invitation, but the comments, random men hugging me and touching me made me feel really uncomfortable and insecure. I would like to visit again because I think it's a beautiful place, but this time with my husband. Next story. I was on a vacation through Central and South America. I think this was on the border of Mexico and Guatemala. I could be remembering wrong though. But I was on a hike, and at one point I came to a bar/pool hall at the top of a small mountain in the woods. Confused at the sight of it and thirsty, my friend and I walked in and were immediately greeted by the entire establishment being filled with MS13 members. Neck and face tattoos of 13 being the big giveaway. You could almost hear the record screech of the music coming to a stop in the heavy glares. Right when we were making peace with our deaths, a nice young man who we had met the night before and partied with on the beach stood up, greeted us warmly, and assured everyone that we were cool. We spent the rest of the day drinking and playing pool with a bunch of gangsters, telling jokes, dancing, etc. It was a good time. Got a ride back off the mountain on a couple of quads back to the hotel that night. 10 out of 10. Next story. Bermuda. I went last year for work and was there for about a week. Due to the nature of my job, I saw most of the country, it's small, and ate at a lot of different places, interacted with most of the culture. In short, I really do feel like I got a pretty accurate survey of the place. While it is pretty there, I found it to be nothing more than a boring watering hole for rich British tourists. There is literally nothing to do on that island except drink and eat subpar overpriced food. Their only industry is tourism. There was also a really obvious divide between white people, usually the managers or bosses, and black people, usually the laborers or hourly employees. I know you could say the same about some parts of America, but it was really uncomfortably stark in Bermuda. It just felt like a bunch of rich white British tourists being waited on hand and foot by underpaid black locals. Next story. When I hitchhiked across the Croatian-Serbian border, we had to cross the actual checkpoint by foot because nobody was willing to take us in their car. There were signs everywhere warning about police corruption. in. We made it through the first checkpoint, then a huge scary customs officer gestured for us to come over, so we walked over, scared crapless. We may or may not have had some herbal medicine in our bag. We get to the booth, and the guy reaches under his desk and proceeds to hand us 2 bottles of lemonade. He sees our terrified, confused looks, breaks into a huge grin, and welcomes us to Serbia. Well, folks, we have made it through all the terrible locations. I remember doing another one of these videos a while ago on Undersparked. I don't know if it's up on the channel, but India took a pummeling, so I'm not surprised to see it brought up a few times, but like last time, India took 85 L's in that video. I'm gonna be real with you. Sorry, India lovers, but that's just how the stories went down. But anyway, folks, feel free to share your situations, your crazy travel locations in the comments down below. But thank you all so much for watching, commenting. Have a really good day, and bye-bye.